All right, so today we're going to be looking at conditionals. But before we get started, I want to go over a few things. Firstly, there's just one more video where I'll be talking about C# theory, and we're going to go back into just coding. The reason I wanted to do these videos, if you think about learning a new language, you don't actually go by reading a dictionary on that language. You would maybe learn how to craft a few sentences, and then you would start speaking to people to actually perfect your use of the language. It's kind of the same approach we're taking today. So I'm going to go over conditionals today, and next week we'll look at methods and enumerations. And then we're just going to go right back into coding. I want to be able to do more complicated things where I'm actually using the right terms and explaining it in more technical terms. So I'm hoping that these videos have been helpful. I noticed maybe this is less interesting for people who've already gone through some coding tutorials before. Very understandable. However, if I do go back into coding, I'd like the fundamentals to be covered so that people are not having questions that are kind of beyond the scope of the video I'm making at that time. So I hope that explains a bit why we're doing this. There's just one more video and then we're going right back into Visual Studio and making interesting things and trying to break Revit. So today let's just look at conditionals. It's one of the more interesting uses of programming, and let's get started. So what is a conditional? To start with, it's good to think of it like something that happens in case something else doesn't happen. So in case of X, do Y. In case of emergency, run like hell and don't stop until I say so. So that's a conditional. If there is an emergency, try your best to run and don't stop running until it's safe. It's kind of the same philosophy that applies to conditionals in programming. The first one that's really common is an if statement. So an if statement simply means if something is happening, this is the thing you should do to support or go against that action. For example, if I am a great teacher, please subscribe to the channel. If I'm not a great teacher, however, you can leave a comment and say, do better. Now, this example is an if else statement. The if statement is not really commonly used because more often than not in real life, you want to give an option of when things don't go according to plan. If the result of what you're trying to program is known and you just want one condition, so if X is Y, do this, then you go for an if statement. But more often than not, you have a situation where you want an alternative option. So if what I'm trying to do doesn't work, do something else. So if Victoria is a great teacher, subscribe. Else, if I'm not that good, leave a comment, and just say what's on your mind. So I hope that is a simplified enough example of what the if else statement is. When we start coding, we'll see it in more technical terms. One of the good things about these conditional statements is that you can actually group a lot of functions, methods, variables, classes into them. You can say, if Revit is working well, create for me a building, else crash Revit and exit and restart. These are just very simplified, relatable examples. It gets clearer as we start to do actually more technical coding. So now let's look at loops. We just looked at if statements. Another kind of conditional that we'll use often in coding are known as loops. So the first is a while loop. Now, if you think of an if statement like a conditional where if this is happening, do this, else do this. A loop is a continuous action. A loop is something that is happening sort of in real time. So while Victoria is a great teacher. If the video is good, subscribe. Else, go and do something else. So a while loop is something that encapsulates a series of functions that you want something to happen while that function is going on. So while I'm creating a wall, if it is floor hosted, allow me create the wall. Else, tell me this wall needs to be floor hosted. That's the worst example because walls do not actually need to be floor hosted. So let's use a better one, a window or a lighting fixture. So while I'm trying to create a lighting fixture, if it's hosted on a ceiling, allow me create the lighting fixture. Else, tell me this lighting fixture needs to be hosted on a ceiling, and then I know that I have to have a ceiling. So this is just a very simple example of what the while loop is. You see it in action as soon as we start coding. Another interesting one is the for loop. So the for loop is very commonly used. It's probably the most commonly used loop we'll experience in programming. And what happens is, firstly, you declare a new variable. So for Victoria, Victoria is appearing for the first time in this line of code, in our hypothetical line of code. And I'm declaring this variable Victoria, and I'm saying Victoria is a good teacher. And I'm saying when the video she makes is less than or equal to the best, or the video she makes is greater than average, subscribe and comment. Now, if I wanted to make a bot to do that, which I will not be doing, this is how I would structure that code. I would be saying, for this person is a great teacher, where, so the semicolon is the end of the first variable. And then you have a second one where you're saying the video is less than or equal to the best. And then you have a third one where you're saying the video is greater than average. I don't want the multi-line nature of this code to confuse you. A for statement is really just the for and your rules for the for loop in brackets. We'll do a more practical example when we start coding, where we'll actually use the for loop to solve something. But basically, it's also something that's repetitive. A loop is like an action that just keeps happening, and you create a condition where it breaks. One of the biggest mistakes beginner programmers make when they're making loops is they don't create an exit action. They just create a for loop and it just keeps running and then the computer crashes. You always want to create an exit. So, for example, in this example I've shown, I don't have any exit point. I'm saying whenever Victoria is a great teacher, the video is less than or equal to the best or greater than average, subscribe and comment. I haven't given any sort of exit to say, okay, stop subscribing and commenting. And if this were to be a real bot, well, my channel will probably get taken down because it would just keep subscribing and commenting. So you find that the for loops is often combined with the conditional statements. So inside of the for loop, it's not uncommon that you would see an if-else statement. And this is because we want to create a condition where our loop breaks. We don't want it to keep just subscribing and commenting. If something happens, continue subscribing and commenting, else just exit. So there are many ways to combine for loops, conditionals. We're going to see some exciting examples as soon as we get to hardcore coding, so just hang in there. The next one is the for each loop. It's similar to the for loop, but you start to go into lists. It's more commonly used when you're kind of iterating through a list. So like for each wall in a building, I want to return the area and the length of the wall. So instead of just saying for wall in building, you would say for each wall in building. It's good for iterating through lists or where you have a collection of data and you want to go kind of index by index, one by one. Finally, let's talk about exceptions. I've talked a little bit about this when I was discussing the for loop and how we wanted to exit at some point. Exceptions and exception handling are a very vital skill for programming. We'll best learn this practically. I'm not going to go into too much explanation for this, but just as an example, an exception is like a try catch statement. So try learning to code with C# and catch any exception where C# is too difficult and just exit and say we'll learn Python instead. This is just a simple real life example, but a try catch statement is saying try this and catch when it's not behaving in this way and then do this. So try running this code. If it's not going to run successfully, if this particular scenario doesn't apply to how I've written the code, catch it as an exception and then do this instead. These are, again, the most simplified examples. I'm hoping that the concepts of the conditionals, loops, and exceptions are more solidified with these examples. When we start coding, we'll see them in action and it will make even more sense as to how they work. I recommend watching more videos on this if it's still a bit confusing. Bro Codes is a YouTube channel I recently discovered for learning C Sharp. I think I'd recommend everyone who's trying to get better at C Sharp to go to that YouTube channel. I'm putting a link in the description. If you're able to master the concepts, what we're about to do in the coming weeks with Revit and coding with Revit will be even more exciting for you. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for coming. We just have one more explainer theoretical video, I promise, and then we're getting right back into the practicals with Visual Studio. So I can't wait to see you. Please do subscribe, leave a comment. This helps me a whole lot more than you could ever imagine. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.